Visual design fundamentals. Visual design is all about communication of information. So bringing together the various things like image, sound, text, basically how the sum of these individual parts create some sort of larger meaning for the user and build the perception of what they're seeing. So we've talked a lot about things like emotion and themes and all that sort of overall things that when you take individual parts together, you can manipulate how they're perceived. So for you guys then, how are you going to successfully build user perception in your portfolio? How are you planning to present your work to give some sort of overall theme or mood or feeling for the user? So any examples online or in the room? Yeah. Okay. All right. So we've got someone who's creating an actual environment to put all the assets in so you can see them cohesively together. So that's a great way to do it there. Since we know you can see individual pieces of something, but until you put them together, you can't really get an idea of the greater meaning or perception. So that might be something to think about a lot for your portfolio, as well as individual render sets of individual objects. Can you put them together in a scene to show that how they contribute to something like a cohesive whole or some way of better communicating not just the pieces but the overall feeling and mood of your particular design. So in terms of things like visual composition, you may have heard of the rule of thirds before, which is the idea that if you imagine everything as having something like a 3x3 grid overlay, and you may have noticed things like digital camera interfaces often show the grid very explicitly on there in a preview. The rule of thirds is a way of emphasizing particular parts of the image, and it's something that's actually naturally quite pleasing to us visually to see. There, generally, it means putting particular aspects in particular thirds of the scene. So things aren't just centered, things aren't just sort of quite sterile and purposeful, but it creates some sort of pleasing flow to the image and separation between it. So it obviously being a rule of thirds, it does mean asymmetry is a big part of it. And well, typically we use things like absolute symmetry and projections for quite technical images and things where it's purely about literal communication. Asymmetry is very useful for things that involve some sort of artistic or expression element to it, since our natural environment obviously consists almost entirely of asymmetry, and it's something that can feel a lot more naturally pleasing to us to look at. So you can put particular important parts of your image in a particular third of the scene, or in the B image on the slide there, you can see the left vertical third is left entirely blank, rather than just centering everything together. So talking about composition, generally, again, asymmetry is just more visually pleasing for us compared to absolute symmetry. So using off-center lines like the rule of thirds, symmetry is effectively the easy way to do things, but it tends to be a bit devoid of expression in a way there, since, again, it's presented in a very clinical, literal way rather than including the overall composition, the overall sense of mood or theme or those extra things that just elevate the design. So you can think about balance as well. So balance in your visual composition. So if you're taking a particular render from a particular angle there, is your image feeling almost weighted to a particular way? So like the examples at the bottom there, you can have contrast between weighting on the image, so things like a very significant, impactful part of your image is only in a particular side of the screen or corner, or you can balance things out, such as having some of the a larger thing foregrounded in the bottom right corner, like in the image there, and smaller, less important things, but more of them in the top left. And in particular, if you look at things like movie posters or game cover art, you'll see some very interesting weighting there where they try to draw your eye to particular parts of it by intentionally putting things off to the side there and then using a different corner to put lots more sort of extra information once you've had that big sort of front impact from the large element of it. So you can use depth cues. There's a list of a few different things there. The idea of shadow or overlap, different textures, relative motion of parts of it. So a lot of things that really want to get your attention will often try to communicate motion or action in some way rather than everything appearing to be still in the scene. You can think about what's the purpose of your particular project and how that may be relevant or not to that. So, if you're doing something like a simulation of um, a surgery or something like that, it may not be as relevant to put huge amounts of motion blur and make it look like everyone's running around or something like that, since it may not be as appropriate for that situation.